भारतवर्ष द क्रेडल ऑफ सिविलाइजेशन नामक इस 3 दिवसीय अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगोष्ठी का आज तीसरा पड़ाव है। मैं इस हॉल में आप सबका स्वागत करता हूं। सर्वप्रथम मैं आज के हमारे सारस्वत अतिथि प्रोफेसर संपदानंद मिश्र जी से आग्रह करूंगा कि वो आएं और अपने वक्तव्य से हमें अनुग्रहित करें। प्रोफेसर संपदानंद मिश्र जी आजकल ये ऋषिहुड यूनिवर्सिटी के साथ एसोसिएटेड हैं। आप संस्कृत के मूर्धन्य आचार्यों में से एक हैं और साथ ही कंप्यूटर्स के साथ भी उनका बहुत जुड़ाव है। प्रोफेसर संपदानंद जी मिश्र।
नमस्कार आप सभी को। In the beginning, my infinite gratitude to Shri Aurobindo and the Mother. I have been a follower of Shri Aurobindo and the Mother for last 27 years. Spent my 25 years of life in Pondicherry, and for last 1.5 years I am at Rishihood University. Today I am delighted to be here, and I'm thankful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak about Shri Aurobindo and the freedom movement of India. Shri Aurobindo's life, and we all know, most of the biographers who have written about Shri Aurobindo, they have expressed that it is not possible to do justice with Shri Aurobindo's life. Shri Aurobindo himself also has said that my life is not at the surface level and cannot be written down by any biographer. Yet, there are many biographies which speak about Shri Aurobindo's life. And if we look at Shri Aurobindo's life, you can see them, though he lived only one life, but within that one life there are many segments. We see his childhood, and the enigma is that his father, Dr. Krishnadhan Ghosh, never wanted him to know anything about India or come in contact with anything Indian. There are reasons behind it. I'm not going to the details. That's how he was admitted into a convent school. Then he was sent to England for his education, where he lived 14 years compared to the 14 years of Vanavas of Sri Ram. Came back to India, but while he was in England, this whole idea of what he should do for India, because later we see his entire life was dedicated for the nation, entire life was dedicated for the whole humanity. His entire life was dedicated for how the humanity can be transformed. So while in England, he excelled in all his literary activities. He did well, but at the same time, his father, who was unwilling to bring them in contact with anything Indian, he started sending some of the newspaper clips to them, to his children, made them aware of what was happening during that time in India, the British Raj, and all the complicated things which were taking place during that time. Shri Aurobindo's engagement with, or what was arousing his nationalistic spirit, like he again was inspired by two different movements. One was the Irish movement, where the attempt was made to make free the Irish people, and then the reunification of the Italy. So these were the two great movements which triggered some spirit in him. So he became a part of another group in England, which was known as the Lotus and Dagger. And also, like, he was a part of the Majlis team at Cambridge, where they discussed about the British people. So he spent much of his time, though, in creating poetry, learning many things. He excelled in many fields, but his focus was he could realize, and that was one of his experiences. He realized that he had a great role to play so far as the destiny of the humanity is concerned. So he started collecting much data and started preparing himself how he would contribute. So the preparation for the movements that he started, it didn't start after his coming back to India, but it all started before he came back to India while he was in England. 1893, he comes back to India. A very different phase, again, in the destiny of the humanity. Like when Shri Aurobindo was coming from west to east, Swami Vivekananda was going from here to the west to give the message of Sanatana Dharma to the whole humanity, as if there was a balance which was taking place. And we all know what role Swami Vivekananda played in the life of Shri Aurobindo later. That I'll come back a little later. So Shri Aurobindo comes back to India with the mission of, though he had many things to achieve, but his whole central mission was to fight for the freedom of India. So he came back, and there is something which we must note, that the moment he landed on the soil of India, so he described that a great calm descended into my being, and then it remained with him for long, forever, as long as he was there physically on the earth. So he bowed down before the Mother India. That's again is another important part of his nationalistic spirit, that when everyone considers or regards his own country as just a piece of earth or a piece of land, mountains, rivers, just the geographical area. So he regarded his own nation as the mother, and he worshipped it. And we find enormous amount of materials in Shri Aurobindo's writing, how he respected the Mother India as a Bhavani Bharathi. So during his Baroda period, because he was brought to Baroda, and his father, his family members, they wanted that he should become an ICS officer. But he declined it. He failed himself knowingly in the Ghud Sawar, in the horse riding. If he had passed out, he would have become, as Dr. Karan Singh ji had written in one of his articles, that he would have become an officer in Tiruchirappalli. So he wrote that, okay, it would have been good for Tiruchirappalli, but the humanity would have missed a Shri Aurobindo. So he failed in ICS knowingly, that he did not want to serve the British government. And during his England stay, Sayaji Gaikwad, he was there because he always visited England to meet young, fresh minds who could serve the nation. So that's how he met 20 years old Sri Aurobindo, and then brought him to his to help him in his official work. At the same time, he was appointed as a professor there in the Baroda University at present, MS University. So he came back. His acquaintance with, he had no idea about what Indian culture, what Indian literature, Sanskrit, languages. He knew a little bit of his own mother tongue, but very little. He started focusing on learning the Indian languages, especially Sanskrit and Bengali, and mastered the language, Sanskrit language, entered into the Upanishads, not in the Vedas, but Upanishads, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and many other classical literature of of India, not only in Sanskrit but in other languages. He had acquaintance with Marathi, Hindustani, Bengali, and Sanskrit was his soul, as if. So during that time, Deshpandeji was editing the Indu Prakash, and so without putting his name, he started writing very powerful articles in Indu Prakash. No one knew who was writing about it, and his target was not the British people, but his target was the people of that time who led the National Congress. So he did not write from the beginning as if he was a born revolutionary. That's what we see in Shri Aurobindo. So he triggered the revolutionary spirit in him, and he said that without a revolution, a country can never get the freedom. He did not believe in the usual non-violence that we are familiar with. But at the same time, it was not a violent attack on any, but a true revolution with the true spirit, as we find in the Gita. He was very much inspired by the Gita. So his revolutionary spirit acted in him in such a way that he started preparing young minds to send as his soldiers. That's where Jatin Banerjee, again without a name, he was admitted into the army, Baroda army, and then from there he sent him to Kolkata to prepare the whole background of getting money and preparing people so then this revolution can take place. So his articles in Indu Prakash became so acute and it was intolerable for many people, so he was requested to tone down. But then ultimately those articles, he had to stop writing those articles because it was very high-toned article against the moderates. So that's how we see that then again in 1905 when the Banga Bhanga took place by Lord Curzon, so he had to go back to Kolkata. He was appointed as a professor again in the National College, now the Jadavpur University. So that's where he started he openly participated in the politics. So what was his political theory? How did he make this whole movement proceed? So if we look at it, like we can see the three things. The first thing is that there was this revolutionary group, revolutionary organization should be there to fight against the enemies. And he said that, look, when someone is sitting, the enemy is sitting on your mother's chest and sucking the blood, what would you do? What the children would do? So you have to fight against. And we see that spirit in his little poetry in Sanskrit, Bhavani Bharathi, where he worshipped the Mother India as Bhavani Bharathi. If you are not familiar with his writings, Sanskrit writings, Shri Aurobindo not only appreciated Sanskrit, not only wrote about Sanskrit, gave us a new philological theory based on the Sanskrit design. He considered Sanskrit as the Atman of Bharat. He wanted that to become the national language of Bharat. And it has much to do with the movement that he started. So he himself wrote in Sanskrit, few texts are available. So one of the main texts is Bhavani Bharathi, another is Tantric Siddhi Prakaranam, another is Shri Aurobindo Upanishad. But in Bhavani Bharathi, he could arouse like anyone who reads that poem. But unfortunately, that whole poem was confiscated by Kolkata police and it was handed over to the ashram in 1985. So till 1985, no one knew about Shri Aurobindo's writing of Bhavani Bharathi. But that poem he had described the whole scene, what was happening during that time, and then what was needed. His revolutionary movement, his idea of nationalism, his idea of political theory, everything had a spiritual basis. Because without a spiritual basis, no movement, no theory, no idea of nationalism would be successful. There are many revolutionary movements which became unsuccessful in this country, in the history of humanity, in any country. It's because of lack of spirituality. Not only the political theories or movements, even civilizations have disappeared because of lack of the spiritual foundation. So Shri Aurobindo always considered that the spiritual force, the spiritual wisdom which our ancient rishis, ancient seers and sages had created, that foundation was responsible, is responsible and will be responsible for the continuity of India's civilization, India's existence, Indian culture. So he made that spiritual force, that spiritual wisdom, that spirituality as the basis of his nationalism and basis of his political theory. So he believed, he not only believed, he worshipped the land, and he has said about it. And then again, when we read his articles in Karma Yogin and Vande Mataram, this is what he started with Bipin Chandra Pal when he went to Kolkata. So he became, he started writing the editorials in Vande Mataram. And those articles were so powerful that Britishers, after reading, I mean, it had the power to shake the whole nation. He could arouse that spirit of nationhood amongst the people, because one of the great things about Shri Aurobindo, that when the whole idea of freedom movement was confined only to the elites writing articles and then creating some policy, requesting to the British government, prepare documents, it is for the first time Shri Aurobindo could bring that whole movement into the whole mass of people. He could arouse that spirit among the people of India. So he said that as when we see the Durga had the weapon of all the gods and goddesses in her hand, it was a collective spirit which was working in the annihilation of the Asuric forces. In the same way, he said the entire nation must come harmoniously, because this harmonious collective aspiration could change the whole circumstance. That's where he considered that all the millions of people who are living here, they are the real force who, once triggered, can bring this change in the country's destiny. So that's what he did. And his, as I mentioned, that his idea of political theory, his whole idea of concept of nationhood, nationality, nationalism, is based on the spirituality, where he, when we read his writings on, say, Bhavani Mandir, because he heard that Ramakrishna saying to him, Mandir Godo, Mandir Godo. So he heard it subtly, and then he started preparing that every village in India should have a temple dedicated to Mother India, a Bhavani Mandir, where Bhavani Bharathi would be worshipped. The Gita will be read on a regular basis. And all those who were acquainted and all those who participated in his movement, in this movement, in his revolutionary movement, they all had the Gita in the hands. So they considered that as the force, the spiritual force, which would work behind all that they did. So his concept of nationhood, his political theories, again, when we look at his the movement he started, the first thing he did, that there has to be a revolutionary organization to fight against the enemies. Second, the idea of Purna Swaraj, complete freedom. We are not begging the freedom, but it is our, as Bal Gangadhar Tilak said, he resonated more with that Swaraj is my birthright. Just look at the word Swaraj. The idea of Swadeshi, boycott, is for the first time in this country was initiated by Shri Aurobindo. Later, it was adopted by others. So his boycott, economic boycott, educational boycott, social boycott, so you can look at it from different angles, like by creating a national system of education. So he gave this whole idea of educational boycott, economic boycott, Swadeshi, the idea of Swadeshi. So it was not to create hatredness for others, but to become oneself. Because later he says, in most of his writings, we do find this, that if India had to develop, it has to become herself, not by imitating the rest of the world, but by becoming herself. India can develop, India can become the Vishwa Guru. And this, by becoming herself, means realizing its own swabhav, own swadharma, and living up to that swabhav and swadharma. And most of the times, the question comes up, even like recently we had organized a talk where this whole idea was discussed, but there was a question mark on nationalism. So people do put a question mark on nationalism, that this nationalism, nationhood, is again confined to the nation. So how can it be accepted? So Shri Aurobindo's whole idea of nationalism, if we look very closely and if we evaluate it critically, we will see that his idea of nationhood or nationalism was not confined only to the country, because he describes again and again that India is, and India's development is for the betterment of the humanity. He believed in the same philosophy of the ancient seers and sages who lived sarva bhuta hite rata. And this is the basis of Shri Aurobindo's nationalism, who always worked out for the betterment of the humanity. And if we look at Shri Aurobindo's life, his political life and his spiritual life, he always followed that spirituality. And after retiring from his political life, now we know that he participated in all kinds of political movement. In fact, he was the supreme hero. That's how he was looked upon. Think of Subhash Chandra Bose. If you read his writings, like how much respect he paid, and he was inspired by Shri Aurobindo's revolutionary spirit. Later, again, Subhash Chandra Bose, when he wanted to bring the Japan here to India, that was again condemned by Shri Aurobindo and the mother, both of them, that don't do that mistake of bringing the Japan to India to fight against the British people. So he had a clear idea because of his Trikala Drishti, because how he attained the Trikala Drishti and what was he seeing, that's what we could see in his writings, Shri Aurobindo's writings on record of yoga. So he had deep spiritual realizations and Trikala Drishti, where he could see the past, present and future, and knew where the destiny is leading to the humanity. So that's where he participated in all kinds of movements. He created a very different sensation among the people to fight against, to become aroused and to respect the motherland, and then fight against the Asuric forces. At the same time, his writings were so powerful that Britishers were always afraid of him. In fact, it is recorded in the British document about Shri Aurobindo. They wrote that the most dangerous man in India. And they tried in all possible ways to get rid of him or to send him somewhere else, not in India. So that's how it happened, that because Shri Aurobindo belonged to this radical group, not the moderate group, there was split. And if we read the whole history of the freedom movement, and especially go through the pages of Bande Mataram editorials, so we see that what kind of revolution he created, what kind of mindset he created among the people, and especially after the Banga Bhanga. So he was haunted by the British people, and they were looking for opportunity to, mm, you know, put him into jail, and it happened that he was uh, put into jail because of the Alipur bomb case. But it turned out to be a transition in the life of Shri Aurobindo, where he had a very different realization what he spoke in Uttarpara Speech. Like some of you I would request, or all of you I would request, like if you want to know Shri Aurobindo's idea of nationalism, Shri Aurobindo's idea of India, please listen to or read Shri Aurobindo's Uttarpara Speech, where he describes his whole experience, what happened in Alipur jail. So in the Alipur jail, so it turned out to be his sadhana kendra. So he started his sadhana, deep sadhana, and where he had the darshan of Sarvam Vasudeva Mayam Jagat, as it is described in the Gita itself, like Sarvam Vasudeva Mayam Jagat, Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha. Rare is that person who has the darshan of Vasudeva in everything. And that is the kind of realization he had. And then he said, Sri Krishna, he placed the Gita in my hand and then asked me to follow. So he completely switched off his political life, did not think about it. He thought like, what next? He thought, I mean, this is the realization that he had a different role to play in order to transform the entire humanity. It doesn't mean that Shri Aurobindo completely retired from his political life, but his participation in the freedom movement, it happened in a different way. So from there he moved, like from the Alipur jail, he moved to when he was freed. And how he was freed also is a whole story. Like one can read, there are 2 volumes which are published by the Alipur bomb conspiracy, like how this conspiracy happened and then how he was released from. And even before I conclude, I would like to read out a quote by Chittaranjan Das, who what he said about Shri Aurobindo, and when he was released, or what he presented in the court. So Sri Aurobindo's role in India's freedom, as I said, that his whole idea of nationalism, his idea of building a revolutionary organization, his idea of Swaraj, Swadeshi, and the spiritual basis of everything, that's what contributed a lot towards the freedom of India. And then when we are talking about the freedom movement of India, Sri Aurobindo must be kept at the center. So these are the few ideas which I wanted to share, but before I conclude, as I said, I would like to read out a passage from Chittaranjan Das, what he said, like who is Sri Aurobindo. This is what we see, just 1 minute. Yeah, to quote from Chittaranjan Das, and he presented it in the court, and this is how I will conclude my deliberation. He said that my appeal to you is this, that long after the controversy will be hushed in silence, long after his turmoil and agitation will be ceased, long after he is dead and gone, he will be looked upon as the poet of patriotism, as the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. So this is how we see Sri Aurobindo. Long after he is dead and gone, his words will have echoed and re-echoed, not only in India, but across distant seas and lands. Therefore I say, that man in his position is not only standing before the bar of this court, but before the bar of the High Court of history. So this is how Chittaranjan Das not only made him free from this case, but he paid his tribute to Shri Aurobindo, the poet of patriotism, the prophet of nationalism, and the lover of humanity. Thank you all.
बहुत बहुत आभार आचार्य संपदानंद जी। सुब्रतो जी।
We are so honored that that Shri Aurobindo found a voice through Sampadanand ji today. We are equally honored that his presence, through his presence, Shri Aurobindo is now at Rishihood University. So this is deeply symbolic, and it is also an auspicious moment for all of us. So thank you, sir, for being here.